In the heart of a bustling kingdom, where cobblestone streets stretched like veins through a living body, stood the royal palace. It was an awe-inspiring sight. Its towering spires kissed the clouds, and golden banners fluttered in the breeze. The palace was protected by the royal guards, men and women clad in gleaming armor that caught the sunlight with every step they took. They were known throughout the land for their discipline, strength, and unwavering loyalty to protocol. Among these guardians was Captain Alaric, a man whose name carried weight within the ranks. With graying hair peeking out from under his helmet and eyes, as sharp as the sword at his side, he commanded respect. For decades, Alaric had been the epitome of what it meant to serve the crown. His posture was always perfect, his voice firm, and his actions precise. He lived and breathed the rules set forth by the monarchy, never questioning them, never wavering. To most, he seemed untouchable, a statue carved from duty itself. But beneath the polished armor and stern expression lay a man burdened by something deeper. Years of enforcing strict protocols had left him feeling hollow. Alaric often found himself staring into the distance when no one was watching, wondering if there was more to life than following orders without question. Was this all there was? Day after day, standing guard, ensuring order, keeping people at arm's length. It felt like he was missing something vital, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. The kingdom thrived around him, full of laughter, chatter, and life. Merchants shouted their wares in the market square, children played tag between stalls, and musicians strummed lively tunes on street corners. Yet none of it touched Alaric. The world outside the palace gates moved forward, vibrant and alive, while he remained rooted in place, bound by his responsibilities. One sunny afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, Alaric stood at his usual post near the grand entrance of the palace. People passed by, nobles in fine silks, farmers carrying baskets of produce, travelers seeking refuge, but none dared approach the guards. Protocol dictated that civilians keep their distance unless summoned, and so the guards remained isolated, towering figures of authority rather than connection. As Alaric scanned the crowd absent-mindedly, something unusual caught his eye. Amidst the flow of people, a small figure sat alone on the cold cobblestones. A child, no older than 6 or 7, hunched over with her knees pulled close to her chest. Her clothes were plain but clean, and her hands clutched something tightly against her chest. Tears streamed down her face, glistening in the sunlight, yet she made no sound. No cries, no sobs, just silent weeping. Other guards noticed her too, but none moved. Some exchanged glances, shrugging off the sight as irrelevant to their duties. After all, comforting a crying child wasn't part of their training. One even muttered under his breath, "Not our problem." But Alaric couldn't look away. There was something about the way she sat there, so small and vulnerable amidst the chaos of the city, that tugged at a corner of his heart he thought had grown numb. For a moment, he hesitated. Protocol was clear. Guards weren't supposed to interact with civilians unless absolutely necessary. This was not a matter of security. It was simply a child crying. And yet, Alaric felt his feet shift slightly, his gaze locked on the little girl. She reminded him of someone, perhaps a memory long buried, or maybe just the innocence he feared losing touch with entirely. He glanced around, half expecting another guard to step in and handle the situation. When no one did, he realized the decision rested solely on him. Could he really ignore her, or would doing so only deepen the emptiness he already felt? Taking a deep breath, Alaric made up his mind. Whatever consequences awaited him, he knew one thing for certain. Turning his back now would mean losing a piece of himself forever. Alaric stood motionless in the doorway of the guard barracks, watching as the little girl, Ilara, she called herself, disappeared into the bustling crowd outside. His heart felt lighter than it had in years, though he couldn't quite explain why. Fixing a broken toy horse wasn't exactly heroic, nor was it something that would make history books. Yet there was an undeniable sense of fulfillment in what he'd done. For the first time in decades, Alaric felt like he truly made a difference, not for the kingdom or the crown, but for one small child who needed help. As he returned to his post near the palace gates, whispers began to ripple through the ranks of the royal guards. Word spread quickly about what had happened. "Did you hear? Captain Alaric left his station to fix some kid's toy." One guard muttered under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. Another chimed in. "He broke protocol just to play carpenter. What's gotten into him?" Some of the guards scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as reckless and unprofessional. After all, their duty was clear: protect the palace, enforce the rules, and maintain order without exception. Helping a civilian, even a crying child, wasn't part of the job description. But not everyone shared this view. Among those who overheard the murmurs was Lieutenant Serafina, a young recruit with fiery determination and a kind heart hidden beneath her polished armor. Serafina had always struggled with the coldness expected of the royal guards. She joined the force because she wanted to serve her people, not stand apart from them. Watching Alaric kneel beside Ilara, seeing the joy on the girl's face when her toy was repaired, it struck a chord deep within her. It reminded her of why she became a guard in the first place: to make a difference, no matter how small. Inspired by Alaric's actions, Serafina decided to keep an eye out for opportunities to connect with the people around her. That very afternoon, while patrolling the market square, she noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry a heavy basket of fruit. The woman's hands trembled as she tried to lift the load onto a cart, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool breeze. Most passers-by hurried past, too busy with their own errands to notice her plight. Without hesitation, Serafina stepped forward. "Let me help you with that, Mom," she said warmly, taking the basket from the woman's arms before she could protest. The elderly woman looked up in surprise, her weary eyes softening with gratitude. "Thank you, dear," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "These old bones aren't what they used to be." "It's my pleasure," Serafina said with a smile, hoisting the basket onto the cart with ease. As she turned to leave, the woman called after her, "Bless you, child. May your kindness come back to you tenfold." Serafina paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. They weren't grand or dramatic, but they filled her with a quiet pride she hadn't felt in ages. Later that evening, Serafina found herself near the palace walls, where street children often gathered. Many of them were barefoot, their clothes patched and frayed, yet their laughter echoed brightly against the stone barriers. Feeling a pang of compassion, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a few pieces of dried fruit she'd saved from her lunch. Approaching the group cautiously, she held out the snacks, smiling warmly. "Here you go, friends," she said softly. "Something to keep your spirits high." The children stared at her for a moment, unsure whether to trust this armored figure offering food. But then one brave boy stepped forward, taking a piece of fruit with a shy grin. The others followed suit, each thanking her with wide, grateful eyes. Serafina watched as they eagerly shared the treats among themselves, their giggles filling the air like music. Back at the barracks, whispers continued about both Alaric and Serafina's actions. Some criticized them, calling their deeds reckless and unnecessary. Others admired their courage to defy tradition, even if only in small ways. What no one realized yet was that these acts of kindness were planting seeds of change, seeds that would soon grow into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The legacy of Captain Alaric, Lieutenant Serafina, and the royal guards who dared to break protocol lived on long after their time. Decades passed, and the kingdom continued to flourish, not because of its towering spires or vast riches, but because of the spirit of kindness that now defined it. The bond between the palace and its people had grown so strong that it became a cornerstone of the kingdom's identity. Stories of the compassionate guards were told and retold, not just in whispers among villagers, but in grand halls during festivals and celebrations. Every year, on the Day of Kindness, the entire kingdom came alive with joy and gratitude. Streets were adorned with colorful banners, music filled the air, and laughter echoed through every corner. Guards and citizens worked side by side, planting trees, cleaning rivers, and building shelters for those in need. Children dressed up as knights and princesses, pretending to fix broken toys or rescue stranded kittens, inspired by tales of Alaric and his fellow guards. Even travelers from distant lands joined in, marveling at how love and unity could transform an entire society. Statues of Alaric and Seraphina stood proudly near the palace gates, weathered by time but still gleaming under the sun. Flowers were often placed at their bases by grateful citizens, along with handwritten notes expressing thanks. One note read simply, "Because of you, we know what true strength looks like." Another said, "You taught us that heroes aren't just brave, they're kind." These words served as a constant reminder of the impact one act of compassion could have, rippling outward to touch countless lives. The younger generation of guards carried the torch of kindness forward, ensuring that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. Training sessions no longer focused solely on combat skills or discipline. They included lessons on empathy, communication, and community service. Recruits were encouraged to think beyond rules and consider the human element in every decision they made. A guard's greatest weapon isn't a sword, Finn would say during training, now a respected mentor himself. It's the ability to see others not as strangers, but as family. Even the monarchy embraced this new era of connection. Kings and queens who followed in the footsteps of the wise ruler who had commended Alaric's actions ensured that compassion remained central to governance. Laws were crafted not only to maintain order, but also to uplift and support the most vulnerable members of society. The palace itself became more open, hosting events where citizens could meet their leaders face to face, share concerns, and celebrate victories together. Outside the kingdom's borders, the story of the compassionate guards inspired change far and wide. Neighboring lands sent envoys to learn about the practices that had transformed the once stoic royal corps into beloved protectors. Many adopted similar approaches, realizing that authority rooted in empathy fostered loyalty and trust. The ripple effect of Alaric's simple act of fixing a child's toy horse extended far beyond what anyone could have imagined, proving that even the smallest gestures could spark monumental shifts. As generations turned over, the names Alaric and Seraphina became synonymous with courage and compassion. Their stories were woven into songs sung by bards, painted onto murals in town squares, and etched into history books. Parents used their examples to teach children valuable lessons about kindness, reminding them that true heroism wasn't about grand deeds, but about making someone's day a little brighter. And so, the kingdom thrived, not because it was perfect, but because it was united by a shared belief in the power of kindness. The royal guards remained steadfast in their dual roles as protectors and friends, embodying the idea that strength and compassion could coexist. They proved that breaking protocol wasn't always an act of rebellion. It could also be an act of love. In the end, the legacy of Alaric, Seraphina, and all those who followed in their footsteps was simple yet profound. A single moment of kindness could melt even the hardest hearts, bridging divides and creating connections that lasted lifetimes. And in a world often overshadowed by challenges, that truth shone brightly, a beacon of hope, reminding everyone that humanity's greatest strength lay in its capacity to care. One fateful evening, the kingdom was struck by a storm unlike any it had seen in decades. Dark clouds rolled in like an invading army, swallowing the sky whole. The wind howled through the streets, tearing at banners and scattering market stalls like leaves in a whirlpool. Rain poured down in relentless sheets, flooding cobblestone streets and turning them into rivers of mud. Lightning split the heavens, illuminating terrified faces as people scrambled to save what they could from the rising waters. The royal guards, stationed throughout the city, were ordered to maintain order amidst the chaos. But this was no ordinary crisis. It wasn't just about enforcing rules or keeping peace. It was about survival. Homes were being flooded, roofs torn apart, and families separated in the panic. The usual protocols felt woefully inadequate against the sheer force of nature bearing down on the kingdom. Captain Alaric stood near the palace gates, watching as the storm raged around him. His armor gleamed dully under the flashes of lightning, water streaming off its polished surface. He clenched his fists tightly, torn between duty and instinct. Orders dictated that the guards remain at their posts, ensuring the safety of the palace above all else. Yet every cry for help carried on the wind tugged at his conscience. Could he really stand idle while his people suffered? Nearby, Lieutenant Serafina wrestled with the same dilemma. She watched as a group of children huddled together under a crumbling awning, their tiny bodies shaking from cold and fear. Her training screamed at her to stay put, but her heart urged her to act. "We can't just stand here," she muttered under her breath, glancing toward Alaric. If anyone would understand, it would be him. Finally, unable to bear the weight of inaction, Alaric turned to his fellow guards. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil around them. "Tonight, we are not soldiers bound by protocol. We are protectors of this kingdom and its people. Follow me if you're willing to risk everything to save them." Without waiting for permission, Alaric led a small group of volunteers into the heart of the storm. They waded through knee-deep water, helping evacuate families trapped in basements and carrying the elderly to higher ground. Serafina joined him, rallying others to pitch in wherever needed. Together, they formed human chains to pull drowning livestock out of flooded pens and distributed blankets and food stored in the palace reserves. Finn, the young recruit who had once struggled to fit in, proved himself invaluable during the rescue efforts. With boundless energy, he climbed ladders to retrieve stranded pets, handed out lanterns to those lost in the dark, and even braved the raging currents to save a baby swept away in its crib. His bravery inspired others to push past their fears and lend a hand. By morning, the storm began to subside, leaving behind a trail of destruction, but also stories of heroism. Entire neighborhoods owed their lives to the guards who had abandoned their posts to help. News of their actions spread quickly, reaching the ears of the king himself. Summoned to the throne room, Alaric, Serafina, and several other guards braced themselves for punishment. Surely, defying orders so blatantly would come at a steep price. As they entered the grand hall, dripping wet and exhausted, the king rose from his seat. His expression was unreadable, his piercing gaze sweeping over the group. For a long moment, silence filled the chamber, broken only by the sound of rain still trickling outside. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the king spoke, not with anger, but with quiet admiration. "You have risked your positions, and perhaps your lives, for my people," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "While your methods may have been unorthodox, your intentions align with the true purpose of our monarchy, to serve and protect." Instead of reprimanding them, the king commended their courage and issued a new decree allowing guards to exercise discretion when compassion was needed most. As they left the throne room, Alaric and Serafina exchanged knowing smiles. What started as small acts of kindness had grown into something far greater, a reminder that even in the face of chaos, humanity could shine brightest when given the chance. And though the storm had passed, its lessons would linger, shaping the future of the royal guards and the kingdom itself for generations to come. The ripple effect of Alaric's and Serafina's actions began to spread quietly but steadily through the ranks of the royal guards. At first, it was subtle, small gestures here and there that might have gone unnoticed if not for their growing frequency. A guard who once turned a blind eye to a lost traveler now stopped to offer directions. Another shared his water flask with a parched merchant, struggling under the weight of his cart. These moments were fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet they carried an undeniable warmth that hadn't existed before. Lieutenant Serafina, emboldened by her earlier acts of kindness, took it upon herself to encourage others to follow suit. She started conversations during meal breaks, sharing stories of how helping someone, even in the smallest way, could brighten both their day and her own. "We're not just enforcers of rules," she told a group of younger recruits one evening. We're human beings too, and sometimes bending those rules a little can remind people that we're on their side. Her words resonated with some, particularly the newer members of the Guard who hadn't yet been hardened by years of rigid discipline. One such recruit, a young man named Finn, had always felt out of place among the stoic veterans. He joined the force hoping to make a difference, only to find himself stifled by protocols that left little room for personal connection. Inspired by Serafina's example, he began looking for ways to bridge the gap between the guards and the citizens they served. One morning, while stationed near the palace gates, Finn noticed a boy no older than 10 trying desperately to retrieve a kite stuck in a tree. The child jumped repeatedly, waving a stick in vain as the colorful fabric fluttered just out of reach. Passers-by chuckled at the sight, amused but unwilling to intervene. Finn hesitated for a moment, glancing around to see if anyone would step in. When no one did, he made up his mind. "Need a hand?" Finn called out, approaching the boy with a grin. The child looked up, startled but hopeful. "I don't think I can get it down," he admitted sheepishly. Finn laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. "Leave it to me." With practiced ease, he scaled the tree, careful not to damage its branches, and freed the kite with a triumphant flourish. Handing it back to the boy, he said, "Next time, try flying it somewhere less leafy." The boy beamed, clutching the kite tightly. "Thank you, sir," he exclaimed before running off to join his friends, who cheered excitedly as he returned victorious. Finn climbed back down, brushing dirt off his gloves, and caught sight of Serafina watching him from nearby. She gave him a nod of approval, and he felt a swell of pride knowing he'd done something meaningful. Word of these acts continued to circulate, reaching even the most skeptical corners of the Guard Corps. Some still dismissed them as trivial or unnecessary, arguing that their primary role was to protect the kingdom, not coddle its citizens. But others began to question whether enforcing rules without empathy truly fulfilled their purpose. Were they meant to stand apart from the people, or were they supposed to stand with them? Captain Alaric observed these changes with a mix of pride and caution. He knew that breaking protocol, even for noble reasons, came with risks. Yet, seeing the impact of these small acts, the smiles, the gratitude, the renewed trust, it reaffirmed his belief that compassion could coexist with duty. During training sessions, he subtly encouraged recruits to think beyond the letter of the law. "Rules exist to guide us," he told them one day, "but they don't define our humanity. Remember why we wear this armor. To protect, yes, but also to serve." As weeks passed, the transformation within the ranks became more evident. Guards began greeting civilians with polite nods instead of indifferent stares. They offered assistance whenever possible, balancing their responsibilities with genuine care. The once impenetrable wall between the palace and its people started to crumble, brick by brick, replaced by bridges built on kindness and understanding. Though many outside the Guard remained unaware of these shifts, those who benefited from them carried the stories home. A farmer whose cart was pushed out of mud. A mother helped across the street with her infant. A street performer given a coin and a smile. Each act, however small, planted seeds of goodwill that blossomed into something extraordinary. A bond that reminded everyone involved that behind the armor, there were hearts beating just like theirs. The throne room was silent except for the faint dripping of rainwater from the guard's armor onto the marble floor. Alaric stood at the front of the group, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected anger, perhaps even dismissal from the ranks, but instead, the king's words hum in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The decree that followed, granting the royal guards permission to act with compassion when necessary, was more than they could have hoped for. It wasn't just approval, it was validation. As the guards filed out of the throne room, their steps felt lighter, their spirits buoyed by the king's unexpected leniency. Lieutenant Serafina couldn't help but smile as she walked beside Alaric. "Do you think this will change things?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of thunder outside. "I believe it already has," Alaric replied, his tone thoughtful. "What we did last night, it showed everyone that being the guard isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about protecting people, not just from danger, but from despair." Word of the king's decision spread quickly through the palace and beyond. For the first time, the royal guards were seen not as distant enforcers, but as allies in times of need. Citizens who once avoided eye contact now greeted them warmly, offering nods of gratitude or quiet thanks. Mothers pointed them out to their children, saying, "See, those are the brave souls who saved us during the storm." Merchants left small tokens of appreciation, fresh bread, jars of honey, handmade trinkets, at the palace gates, which the guards humbly accepted. With the newfound freedom granted by the king's decree, the guards embraced their roles with renewed purpose. Alaric became a mentor to younger recruits, teaching them that true strength lay not in rigid discipline alone, but in understanding and empathy. During training sessions, he shared stories of his own struggles, the doubts he faced, and the moments that had shaped him. "Being a leader means knowing when to follow your heart," he told them one day. "Rules guide us, but humanity defines us." Serafina took charge of organizing outreach programs aimed at strengthening ties between the guards and the community. She arranged weekly visits to orphanages, where guards spent time playing games and telling stories to children who craved attention and care. On market days, they helped set up stalls for elderly vendors too frail to manage on their own. Slowly but surely, trust began to replace fear, and respect replaced resentment. Even Finn, the young recruit who had once doubted his place among the veterans, found confidence in the new direction of the corps. Encouraged by Serafina, he started a reading initiative for street children, using old books donated by palace staff. Every evening, he gathered the kids under a tree near the palace walls, reading aloud tales of adventure and bravery. His efforts earned him nicknames like Storyteller Finn and Knight of Tales, endearing him to both children and adults alike. But perhaps the most profound change came within the guards themselves. Conversations around the barracks grew livelier, filled with laughter and camaraderie rather than stiff formalities. Veterans who had once scoffed at acts of kindness began joining in, realizing how much joy such gestures brought, not only to others but to themselves. One grizzled surgeon named Garrick, known for his gruff demeanor, surprised everyone by baking cookies for a local charity event. When teased about his newfound softness, he simply shrugged and said, "Even iron can bend without breaking." The transformation extended beyond the palace walls. Villagers who lived on the outskirts of the kingdom, often overlooked by officials, noticed the difference too. Guards patrolling remote areas stopped to check on isolated farms, ensuring families had enough supplies to get through harsh winters. They mended broken fences, repaired leaking roofs, and even planted crops alongside farmers after fields were ravaged by floods. These acts may have seemed small, but their impact was immense, fostering goodwill that rippled across the land. As months passed, the bond between the royal guards and the people grew stronger. No longer were they viewed as symbols of authority to be feared. They were neighbors, friends, and protectors in every sense of the word. The storm that had tested their resolve had also revealed their capacity for compassion, a lesson neither the guards nor the kingdom would ever forget. And though challenges still lay ahead, the seeds of connection sown during those turbulent times promised a brighter, kinder future for all. Years passed, and the bond between the royal guards and the people of the kingdom only grew stronger. What had started as small acts of kindness during a storm became a way of life, a tradition that shaped the very identity of the guard corps. The once distant relationship between the palace and its citizens transformed into something remarkable, a partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual care. Captain Alaric eventually retired, his hair now fully gray and his armor worn from years of service. On his final day, he stood in the courtyard surrounded by fellow guards, recruits, and even some of the villagers who had come to bid him farewell. His eyes glistened with emotion as he addressed the crowd. "When I first joined the ranks," he began, his voice steady but filled with warmth, I thought my duty was to enforce rules without question. But over time, I learned that true strength lies not in rigid discipline but in compassion. Remember this: a kingdom is not defined by its walls or its wealth, but by the hearts of its people and those who protect them. Serafina took over as captain after Alaric's retirement, carrying forward the legacy he had helped create. Under her leadership, the royal guards continued to break down barriers between themselves and the community. She introduced new programs, such as teaching self-defense classes for women and organizing joint festivals, where guards and civilians could celebrate together. These events brought laughter, music, and unity to the streets, reminding everyone that they were part of one shared family. One of Serafina's proudest achievements was establishing an annual Day of Kindness, inspired by the countless stories of goodwill sparked by Alaric's actions years ago. On this day, guards set aside their formal duties to engage fully with the public. They cleaned parks, painted murals, repaired homes, and handed out meals to those in need. Children ran up to hug them, merchants offered free goods as tokens of gratitude, and elders shared stories of how much the kingdom had changed for the better. It became a cherished tradition, celebrated far beyond the palace gates. The impact of these efforts reached farther than anyone expected. News of the compassionate royal guards spread across neighboring lands, drawing admiration and curiosity. Travelers passing through the kingdom often remarked on the unusual friendliness of its protectors. In other places, guards are feared. One merchant said during a bustling market day, "Here, they're loved." Such praise wasn't just flattering. It inspired other regions to adopt similar practices, proving that kindness could be contagious. Statues were erected in honor of Alaric and Serafina, standing tall near the palace entrance. One depicted Alaric kneeling beside a child, symbolizing his first act of defiance against protocol. The other showed Serafina extending a hand to help someone rise, representing her unwavering commitment to connection. Inscribed at the base of each statue were simple yet powerful words: strength through compassion. Even the youngest members of the guard understood the importance of what had been achieved. Recruits like Finn, now seasoned veterans themselves, passed down the lessons they'd learned to the next generation. During training sessions, they emphasized that being a royal guard wasn't just about following orders. It was about making choices that reflected humanity and courage. "You wear this armor not to separate yourself from others," Finn would say, "but to remind you that your strength exists to serve those who cannot protect themselves." The transformation within the kingdom was undeniable. Streets once quiet under the shadow of authority buzzed with life and laughter. Guards patrolled not as enforcers but as friends, exchanging jokes with shopkeepers and waving at children playing tag. Families invited them to weddings, harvest feasts, and holiday celebrations, treating them as extended kin. Even disputes were resolved more peacefully, as citizens felt comfortable approaching the guards not as adversaries but as mediators. Through it all, the royal guards remained steadfast, not only in their duty to protect but also in their commitment to kindness. Their actions proved that bending the rules for the sake of empathy didn't weaken authority, it strengthened it. By choosing compassion over rigidity, they had redefined what it meant to serve, leaving behind a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And so, the kingdom thrived, not because of its wealth or power, but because of the unbreakable bond between its people and those sworn to protect them. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures of kindness can ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could have imagined. The little girl sat slumped on the cobblestones, her tiny shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Alaric's heart sank as he approached her cautiously, his heavy boots clicking against the stones. The sound made her look up, and for a moment their eyes met. Her face was streaked with tears, her cheeks flushed red from crying. In her small hands, she clutched what appeared to be a broken toy, a wooden horse with one of its wheels missing and splinters jutting out from its side. Alaric knelt down slowly, careful not to startle her. His armor creaked as he lowered himself to her level, making him feel even more out of place in this tender moment. "What's wrong, young one?" he asked gently, his deep voice softening to a tone that surprised even him. It had been years since he'd spoken so kindly to anyone, let alone a child. The girl sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand before answering. It's my papa's," she stammered, holding the damaged toy closer to her chest. "He gave it to me before he went away." Her words trailed off, but Alaric didn't need her to explain further. He understood the weight of those simple sentences. This wasn't just a toy, it was a memory, a piece of someone she loved dearly. For a fleeting second, Alaric felt torn. Protocol still echoed in the back of his mind, reminding him that engaging with civilians like this was forbidden. But looking into the girl's tear-filled eyes, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. She was too young to understand the rigid rules of the palace guards, too innocent to deserve being ignored. "May I see it?" Alaric asked, extending a gloved hand toward her. The girl hesitated, glancing at him warily. To her, he must have looked intimidating. His towering frame, his gleaming armor, the stern expression etched onto his face. But after a long pause, she nodded and placed the broken horse into his palm. As Alaric examined the toy, memories flooded his mind. He thought of his own childhood, playing with wooden swords and makeshift toys crafted by his father. Back then, life had been simpler, filled with laughter and warmth rather than duty and discipline. Holding the little horse now, he felt a pang of nostalgia and sadness for the days when such things mattered more than rules and responsibilities. "This is a fine horse," Alaric said, trying to sound cheerful despite the lump in his throat. "But it looks like it's seen better days." He turned it over in his hands, inspecting the damage. "Would you like me to fix it?" The girl's eyes widened, her tears momentarily forgotten. "You can do that," she whispered, her voice tinged with hope. "I think so," Alaric replied with a small smile. "But we'll need to go somewhere quieter to work on it. Do you trust me enough to come with me?" She nodded shyly, clutching her dress as she stood up. Alaric rose to his full height once more, towering over her like a giant. Yet, instead of fear, there was curiosity in her gaze. For the first time in years, Alaric felt something other than duty guiding his actions. This was compassion, pure and unfiltered, and it felt right. Leading the way, Alaric escorted the girl to the guard barracks, a modest building tucked behind the main palace gates. Inside, tools lay scattered across workbenches: hammers, nails, pliers, and scraps of wood left over from repairing armor and weapons. Alaric set the broken horse down carefully and began rummaging through the supplies. The girl watched silently, her wide eyes following his every move. With steady hands, Alaric worked on the toy, smoothing out the splintered edges and reattaching the wheel with care. He hummed softly under his breath, an old tune from his youth that he hadn't thought about in decades. The melody seemed to soothe the girl, who perched on a stool nearby, swinging her legs idly. When the repairs were complete, Alaric held up the restored horse for her to see. Its once damaged body was whole again, polished to a shine thanks to some extra effort. "Here you go," he said, handing it back to her. "Good as new." Her face lit up instantly, a radiant smile spreading across her features. "Thank you, Sir Knight," she exclaimed, hugging the toy tightly. Without another word, she hopped off the stool and ran toward the door, calling out, "I have to find Mama." Alaric watched her disappear into the crowd outside, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. He knew he'd broken protocol, but somehow it didn't feel wrong. Instead, it felt like the first step toward rediscovering a part of himself.